Hello, guys. Uh, this is it's a unusual thing for me to actually be presenting in an unconference Zoom setup, but that is the world that we are all in, right? Unfortunately, I couldn't figure out how to get a virtual background, so you're just going to see my green screen behind me. I'm dialing in from Zooming, all right, videoing in from Portland, Oregon, which is where I live. Uh, I thought the best way to sort of start all of this off, and this is we have a fun afternoon planned with a lot of uh, the a lot of content on the a lot of content on the stable coin space in general. But I thought maybe the best way to sort of start all of it off is to tell you guys a little bit about myself and my own background and kind of the story behind Sila, so to speak, and then tell you guys a little bit about what Sila is, what we do, and kind of where we fit into the whole crypto and stable coin space. If you so talking about myself, right? Like if you guys haven't figured it out by now, I'm not American, or at least I wasn't born in the U.S. I grew up in South India, came to the U.S. as a software engineer, and that was like a long time ago now, 17 years ago, and ended up working as a consultant for a few years before. In 2009, a classmate of mine from school suggested that we should start a bank together. And yeah, this was around this time when the ink on Satoshi's white paper was still fresh, so to speak. It was June, July of 2009, and I was actually living in Europe at the time, working as a consultant mainly for banks. And you'll see how crazy I am that I thought that in 2009 that starting a bank was a good idea. And so left my consulting firm, moved back to the US, and started up an online banking startup called Simple, which was one of the first neobanks in anywhere in the world, actually. And that was kind of my first foray into the crypto space. In the early days of Simple, when we were trying to figure out uh, uh, how to uh, how to build it, how to ship it. I mean, nobody had ever done anything like it, right? Uh, we ended up spending a little bit of time looking at Bitcoin. And this was the summer of 2010. We ran a node on our servers for a while and just kind of kicked the tires on the tech, right? Because it was beginning to pick up some buzz. And the kind of our conclusion back then was that the the tech was really cool. Like we had never seen, or I no nobody had ever seen a distributed ledger before, and exactly how to make that work was really interesting. At the same time, it was clear that there were some serious challenges with scalability, right? Like when you look at kind of the transaction volume that even a small bank does or a mid-sized bank does, it's really hard to imagine that running that on Bitcoin, or it was back then. And the other issue was really just the currency itself, right? Like Bitcoin was worth a few cents back then, I think, and it was still highly volatile, and it's still highly volatile right now. So we kind of looked at it and just we're like, well, this is interesting. And actually, when we built our ledger at Simple, we built a bunch of like ideas from Bitcoin into it. But we moved on, built and launched Simple. It took 2.5, almost 3 years actually to figure out how to build and launch a neobank. I like to say that we did everything wrong before we did it right, but we finally found a bank partner, found a processor, figured out all the regulatory mess, and got Simple launched. A couple of years after launch, it was acquired by a Spanish bank called BBVA. And then a few months after the acquisition, I was talking to some of the execs at BBVA, and they mentioned this idea of building an API platform at BBVA. And my reaction was like, yes, please do it. The world needs API platforms in banking, and if such a thing had existed, we wouldn't have spent like 3 years at Simple just getting to customer number one. Um, the they were interested. I ended up writing like a document, and long story short, a year later, I was running that, right? So built and launched two API platforms while I was at BBVA, one in Europe and one in the US. And I learned a lot about like the kind of both how to build and launch API platforms, but also, unfortunately, I learned a lot about how the internals of big banks work. And that was frustrating because they don't work very well, the internals of big banks. And so in late 2017, I left BBVA and was just trying to figure out what to do with my life, started checking out crypto again. And obviously, between 2010 and 2017, so much had changed. And I realized that I still wanted to solve this problem. I still wanted to make it much easier for folks to build and ship financial applications. I just didn't think that the big bank was the right place or the right way to do it. A kind of a bank backend, both technically and regulatorily, just didn't work, right? And so I started trying to figure out how to do it with a cryptographic backend or a crypto backend. Maybe we could use modern technology for a change, something created in the 21st century, right? And that's where the Sila came together, and we built and launched it about 7 months ago. So let me tell you a little bit about Sila itself. The kind of the core problem that we're trying to solve at Sila is the current payment system, both within the US but also globally. It just doesn't work well for online businesses. If you're a developer and you wake up tomorrow and you want to code with SMTP or with SMS or voice over IP, there's SDKs, libraries. You can build and ship pretty quickly, and there's a whole ecosystem of companies to help support you. But there's a lot of open protocols that everybody on the planet uses. That just doesn't exist with money. Banks still control most of the world's finances, and they don't have APIs or support next-gen technology, right? When you look at the US, 38% of US payments happen via check. 99% of ACH payments are next business day or slower. And if you're trying to build a financial fintech startup or a crypto startup or anything in the regulated financial world, it still takes 18 plus months. That's fundamentally the problem that we're trying to solve at Sila, right? We give you everything that you need to build and ship a fintech or a crypto application and handle all the underlying payment flows in an automated fashion. We have simple, easy to use APIs. Our pricing is kind of tailored for new projects. The platform itself is programmable and powerful and has a bunch of capabilities in there, including KYC, including ACH payments, including linking bank accounts. Transfers happen, they happen at the speed of block generation, right? So it's 30 to 90 seconds, which is light speed compared to days that it takes a traditional bank transfer. And we have a lot of built-in compliance, regulatory support, and a bunch of like fraud prevention mechanisms as well. Talking kind of specifically about the capabilities that we have on the platform today, and the stuff that we can support through our partners. The core of the product is mainly ACH payments and processing. But of course, to do that, you need to do identity verification of individuals, businesses. You have to be able to support digital wallets. And then, of course, you have to link bank accounts and do a bunch of stuff around that. On the back end, we have an ERC20 token, which is the Sila token, and it is a stable coin, and it is fully custodied, right? It's in fact the underlying funds are FDIC insured, so it is fully guaranteed and safe from sort of a stability perspective. But the main value is that you can actually use it in your application and build and ship it. And then for things like card payments, physical debit cards, kind of like a neobank, and securities trading, wires, bill payment, all of that we can support through Sila partners. The kind of the companies that we serve, there are some crypto companies, but there's also a fair number of sort of fintech, and just traditional businesses coming out of spaces like, crowdfunding, uh, insurance, wealth management, real estate. We the Once you enable programming with money, the kind of the universe of ideas out there is really only limited by your imagination. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about kind of like uh, the the product itself. Obviously, right now we are US only, and we have sort of customers and end users all over the US. The first thing that you have to do to actually use Scylla, you have to go to our website, sign up as a developer, get access to the console, and it is there is a REST over HTTP API platform, which is the core of the product. But most developers end up using one of our SDKs. And then the first thing you have to do is onboard somebody. And to onboard somebody, you have to do a KYC or a know your customer process. That's pretty standard compared to what any online fintech startup does, whether that's a Chime or whether that's a Coinbase, right? We ask for a few details, including a social security number, verify that, and it's pretty fast. We work with Socure and Alloy on the back end, which we think is pretty much the best in the KYC space. And you can onboard an end user, verify their identity within a couple of minutes. Once you've actually onboarded somebody and verified their identity, next thing you can do is link a bank account for them. We work with a company called Plaid, and we essentially wrap that Plaid experience so that you can get the routing and account number of, you onboard Jane Doe, verify her identity, get her routing and account number, and sort of securely transmit it from Plaid to us. And now you have onboarded Jane Doe. The next set of things you can do is actually transfer funds and program with them. So you could take, $100 out of Jane Doe's bank account at Chase, and as soon as those funds settle and we have confirmation that that transaction is probably good, then we will issue the equivalent amount of Scylla to Jane Doe's wallet. And Scylla is just an ERC20 stable coin that represents the dollars. Once those ERC20s are issued to Jane's wallet, obviously you can program with them just the same way you can program with any other ERC20. At the end of it, if you're just trying to transfer funds from Jane Doe to John Smith, you would probably onboard John Smith as well, link his bank account, and then you would take the tokens that you created for Jane Doe, transfer them to John Smith's wallet, and then redeem them back into John Smith's bank account. And at that point, you've transferred $100 from Jane Doe to John Smith. The underlying dollars go from Jane Doe's bank, say Chase, for example, to our partner bank, which is Evolve Bank and Trust. They stay in what's called an FBO account. And until Jane Doe transfers it to John Smith, those funds are fully FDIC insured. And then once they transfer over to John Smith, they're John Smith's funds now and are FDIC insured to him until he puts it back into his Chase or Bank of America account. The combination of like the programmable token on the back end plus the APIs to do KYC, account linking, and ACH really makes it pretty quick and easy to build an application. And we've seen folks build an app in as little as a week, actually. And what you do, obviously, this is just a straight P2P funds flow example. Most of our customers are doing much more complex things than that. But that complexity is really limited only by what you can dream of and what you can code into the platform. We also partner with Plaid, as I mentioned, and we use the Plaid's auth, identity, and balance products. And on the KYC side, we're adding support for businesses as well as the individuals that we already have. We're still an early stage startup. We kind of got launched late last year, October. And one second here. Let me just get back to the screen so I can actually see you guys. And we have been live for about 7 months now, processed a few $1 million in transactions, and have a bunch of customers live, growing nicely. And we also announced that we got funded a few months ago. So Things are looking great. I know I have about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure that I saved at least a little bit of time for you guys to ask me any questions. So if you have any questions, I mean, I can keep talking for hours, but if you have any questions, feel free to uh, pop them into the chat window here. I see a few people here whom I recognize, Yuri being one of them. Any questions from anybody? The COVID so let's see, we have a couple here. View the role evolution of ACH and SWIFT and see any pickup in interest from the banks given the COVID related digitization pressure. Yeah, I mean the the pressure on banks in the last 3 months has been insane. Um, the the thing though is that most of our customers are not banks. Most of our customers are fintech and crypto startups and some traditional businesses. The main problem with banks is that they, even when the spirit is willing, the flesh is weak. If you're a small community bank and you woke up and you're like, all my branches are shut and I'm just going to have to figure out how to do everything online now, and the 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 technology that's at the core of most banks is still a mainframe core processing system from one of two or three from a small handful of vendors like FIS or Fiserv. They're not able to sort of, you can't you can't convert that into a modern platform overnight. It's questionable whether you can ever do that, but definitely not quickly, right? So there's a tremendous sort of acceleration happening in the bank space of kind of all the trends that have been happening for the last decade. But it's it's still really hard for banks to be able to kind of get there quickly enough. So and it's not really sort of super relevant to us, mainly because we serve more fintech startups rather than banks. We have no problems with banks. We'd love to have them as customers, but most of like the 6,000 banks in the country, I'd say over 5,000 don't even have their own have an in-house developer. So it's really hard for them to build and ship stuff. And those sales cycles tend to be like years long. We do see a lot of demand from international banks who are trying to launch US operations. Funnily enough, I think banks outside the US are a lot more forward thinking than many of the banks here. Uh, were there any other questions earlier in the my favorite under the radar project that I think will do really well in the next 3 to 5 years? Obviously, I'm biased. I think Sila will do great. But there's a bunch of interesting stuff happening in both in the sort of fintech and in the crypto space. Don't know if I can pick just one easily. Uh, uh, Whether there's any restrictions on Scylla tokens preventing use in Uniswap pools. It is very much a sort of enclosed platform. So Scylla tokens, you really have to be a verified entity to be able to hold them. I don't know if that prevents them from being used in a Uniswap pool. I haven't actually tried that. I don't see any active Scylla ETH or Scylla DAI pools. I don't think anybody has actually built one. There are some exchanges who we power and who are planning to offer Scylla pairs, but mostly that's via the API. I'm not sure if we've definitely seen a lot of demand for Scylla ETH, Scylla BTC. I don't think we've seen demand for Scylla DAI though. Um, the banks prefer to have stablecoins built on a public ledger, which is more transparent and auditable versus a permissioned ledger. I don't think most banks fully understand the difference just yet, right? And you could have a public ledger that's permissioned. You could have a private ledger that's more open. The nuances of that, I think, are still lost on most banks, and kind of what exactly is needed and who and what's the best outcome, I think is really still up for questioning. I think I'm out of time here, so I'm going to hand it back over to Mason to sort of like take over and get us into the next session.
Awesome.
Thank you, guys.